Welcome to Masterclass, YouTube Masterclass to be specific, and I'm Dr. Sheley. I was hired by YouTube Masterclass to teach one. They didn't really know what position I was going to teach, and they still want me to teach a movie on how to make a YouTube video, which is coming down the road because the more I try to think about that, it's like trying to read Heidegger on a rainy day, so it's tough because you saved it for that rainy day, but that you can only get one sentence in before getting your mind bent in half. Well, it's kind of like that. But tonight on COURSERA and MASTERCLASS, which we're running for Harvard because Harvard needed a film school, so we're going to step in and substitute for Harvard Film School as long as we have to substitute until they put someone in the position, drop this class from their roster, which is on COURSERA really, so it's kind of like, well, everything on COURSERA is on their roster, sort of, but that there's a quantum physics class, that's MASTERCLASS, that's YouTube, that's not my famous one on film criticism, and that I run a little bit of quantum physics here. Has nothing to do with the fact that there aren't other COURSERA math classes and there aren't other YouTube Masters math classes. That there's other film classes and stuff is weird because they're marketing master classes, though you have to be like Abraham Lincoln to even be invited. Or like only Margaret Thatcher and the Dalai Lama get in this episode. Well, that Margaret Thatcher and the Dalai Lama live in this place isn't surprising because we all survived the pandemic, right? And Hollywood survived the pandemic. Let's hear it for international cinema being saved by Hollywood, by it saving Hollywood. And then the strike. Now, when the strike was on for the writers and the actors, it was a hard time for all of us filmmakers because I'm a writer. I couldn't write a screenplay. And I was talking to the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, and they had me take over for their social media for 2 years, and it happened to be about 8 months of it was all strike-centric or whatever, and here I am reporting on the strike, which is illegal because Writers Guild's on strike, so how can you write anything? And I'm sitting here writing about the strike, about not writing. So I'm kind of iconoclastic, only heard of in some small circles. I'm really not looking for a claim to fame with this masterclass. If you want to send me money, go ahead, but I'll probably spend it on weed, which is why you'd want to send it to me in the first place, because I'm in Colorado where it's legal. But these are COURSERA bumps because if you think about it, if I even say an F-bomb, they could grade me down for this teaching, but I'm about to talk about John Cassavetes, and it's real hard for me not to get emotional and use F-bombs sometimes, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm from the class of life that you speak the way you want to be heard, but if you're making a joke, then you make sure it's relevant that you point out that it's a joke. But if it's sarcasm and I start using F-bombs, just reach through the phone, hold up the sign that says COURSERA is going to fail you, which they're not because they've heard me cuss. But let's try to keep this professional because sometimes it veers off in this direction of like, well, once I was an unprofessional myself. I was an unprofessional poet that broke all the poetry records, and I'm still an unprofessional poet. That's why Stanford paid me $1 million to go to their school, and I had to spend $1 million on Stanford to go to their school. It's kind of like how Hollywood works. You know, you pay them the $1 million that they paid you to make a movie. They pay you to make the movie for $1 million. Then you invest your own money in the movie and you pay them back so they'll put their name on it. No, it's not quite that bad, but it's a weird system. It's like gambling that you always break even on. Well, it cost me $1 million to make this first one, but I made 2 off the next one, paid off the first one, and now the next one will cost $1 million. So it's like a free ride. But if they all flopped like that movie Heaven's Gate, which we discussed in semester 1, and we'll kind of veer off to Heaven's Gate, because last time I was talking about Heaven's Gate, I was frothing at the mouth and telling you how sheep trials aren't that exciting. In Babe the movie, where he does that Bahram U stuff, that sheep trial is exciting. Meeker, Colorado is around here somewhere. Not only does it have a 2-headed cow, but it has the exciting notion of the World Olympics of sheep trials. And that's more exciting than the Olympics isn't too hard to figure out, because sheep trials are like, there's this movie called Killer Sheep. I'm not talking of Killer of Sheep. See, Killer of Sheep is an African-American movie which deals with violence and society and unfair boundaries, but Killer Sheep is about a sheep that goes around killing everyone, that it was too violent for me, and I'm from a trauma background, so watch out for Killer Sheep. But we're going to be serious and be professional now. We're all pros at this. We all went to USC. USC is probably screening this somewhere. That they're probably still stuck on the first masterclass, which had nothing to do with anything, and they're just watching the intro. Is usually what happens to most film teachers on masterclass. They get all big and bad on their first one, and then everybody expects them to be Christopher Nolan, and then they turn out to be this broke kid from Colorado who barely has his head from his ass. No, I'm kidding. That was a joke. Who barely has his head from a hole in the ground, and then is suddenly the expert on D.W. Griffith worldwide. Well, you have to go through a lot to be the expert on D.W. Griffith worldwide, which I have been dubbed it several times, and I'm not even trying to ego trip. Because I couldn't name about 10 of his movies unless I saw the title with the movie. And really, to be an expert, you have to have a single frame in front of you to know which film it is. And I'm getting there with Griffith. I'm playing catch up on Griffith. That I've seen all of his extant movies, and including the two that he hated, The Greatest Question and The Birth of a Nation, that we always focus on the bad and forget that he made about 150 masterpieces. Goes from Judith of Bethulia in 1913, where the Zionistic Kabbalists have to save the Jews from obliteration in a film that's so pro-Hebraic that Griffith is practically inviting himself into Jewish Hollywood, which Warner Brothers had done that. And I don't want to say the word Jew in a bad way, and let's talk about that for a second, because as a white guy saying that word, it kind of sounds offensive anyway, and that there are really anti-Semites is something that really I've struggled with forever, because I can't figure out why, if Jews wrote the Bible, that a Christian would be pissed off to even meet a Jew. What, because he's a better writer than you and he wrote your book? But get this. I once told a friend of mine that the Hebrew Bible is the Old Testament. Now, don't let this blow your mind unless you're a religious student. But the Hebrew Bible is actually the Old Testament. The New Testament and Old Testament were named by the Christians, and the Christians picked up the Jewish Bible, copied it exactly from what they had it, which there's no exactly first copy of the Old Testament. Maybe there is. Maybe there's Raiders of the Lost Ark in reality. I don't know. But the point is Jews wrote the Old Testament. It wasn't called the Old Testament until later. Some of them take offense that you'd call it the Old Testament because it's the only testament, and they don't even use the word testament. But the Christian said it's the Old Testament. It made me like it better, because I'm like, well, isn't old stuff better than new stuff? Who'd be offended if they had the original? It's like saying it's the original Testament. The old Star Wars are better, The Old Testament is better, but it's all been proven backwards now, though, because the New Testament does triumph, because there is a horde of Jesus movies going from 1913, from the manger on the cross, running all the way up to the Passion of the Christ. And most of them are like silly cartoons that don't happen. Like Passion of the Christ is like slapstick with like trauma blood. But that Gospel according to St. Matthew and that Last Temptation of Christ and From the Manger to the Cross and Cecil B. DeMille's King of Kings are the only ones I really talk critically about, is because they're the only ones that I saw aesthetic values that were beyond like exaggerated stereotypes that were fairy tales in the guise of being real religious stories. Now, the scene in Intolerance, obviously I'm going to forgive about being a Christ story, but really, every time I watch that movie, they spike me. The original owners of USC spike me with a different copy of Intolerance, because I swear it's never the same movie twice. That Intolerance would end the same way is already inveritable. But I will say, though, there are some similarities between each version of Intolerance I've seen and not. And that the camera and placement does redirect your attention upon a second viewing is a science they knew in the silent era. I'm sorry, it sounds theoretical, but they already knew how to direct your attention in a different way. Second, third, hell, they could do it 24 frames a second. Why not have the film change all the way to its 24th viewing? But that most people haven't seen a movie 25 times goes against the fact that I saw, and what qualifies me for this job, is I saw Natural Born Killers 25 times in high school. And everybody knew that I was this wussy, nerdy kid that wouldn't really turn into a Woody Harrelson and unload on a stranger. But just for the sake of a cool art movie from this usually political guy that's Oliver Stone, that is even
minces the politics in the prison to make it more Tarantino apolitical is just totally Oliver Stone's way of saying, this time I'm going non-political, and that's the biggest politic of them fucking all. And see, I had to cuss there because Oliver Stone would have cussed, and they'd have bleated it out and pretended like it wasn't there. All right, this is the real deal, though. This is what we're talking about. And I know that intro took me a while. I didn't even get to brag about my Pulitzer, which I still have, according to the internet. And the internet's pretty accurate these days on sites that are Google powered. But I've run into some doozies with the whole, is the earth flat or not? Because theory of relativity says it's flat or not. And I say it's flat because a friend of mine will kill me if I don't say it's flat. So you just got to abide by the laws of nature. And if you abide by the laws of nature, like John Cassavetes did, you may not be left with much money, but at least you won't be flattened. Now, here's the trick with John Cassavetes that's really interesting. Early on, when he was working with theatrical companies, even theatrical companies like the Houseman Project, even theatrical companies that had worked with Orson Welles and other actors and actresses and directors of the screen. But Orson Welles really was there in the grassroots of it, and John Cassavetes wasn't there until like a few nights before Lights Out. Doesn't change the fact that they appeared in similar theater circles. Theater circles in the movies are kind of tricky because to be a movie star, one of your qualities, one of your infinite amount of qualities to look great, act great, is that you have to be theater trained. Now, that you have to be method actor trained doesn't say you don't have to be theater trained, because some theater guys have to be method actor trained anyway. And to be method actor trained, you have to have a socio-psychological realism. Socially, you join the position in life that the person you're playing is in. So, if the guy is a baker and he bakes cookies, and you want to be like him, you become a baker. And then for the psychological aspect, you stay at the job and you work with other bakers until you become such a convincing baker. And that you're only in Home Alone for 30 seconds, which is all robbed now by you-know-who being in that movie. And by the way, we're not allowed to say that word on this computer, so the former president's name or whatever is banned from this show. Because one time I said it to a dude and he burst into flames, and it made it into a movie of mine, and 3 people burst into flames. That I was able to put them out. It was a close call, but it's a good thing I played that baker because I learned what to do if the oven caught fire. Now, I'm going to be serious. John Cassavetes is one of the most fantastic filmmakers of all time, and I'm going to qualify this. He got his budget and money to make the films that he made by acting in movies. Now, that he was an accidental actor because he wanted in the movie to make his own budget is interesting because he was theatrically trained. That he was theatrically trained and a method actor led to what he did better than any filmmaker. And I'm pretty good at this, but that he did this better than any other filmmaker is that he posited that you can make movies in improv. Now, how insane is that idea? Make an improv movie. Well, how can you improv a movie if you're recording it and then going back and putting it together? That's not improv. That's knowing where the scenes go. But he's like, what if you go into the movie with no script? Although he always had these giant 900-page scripts that had directions of what he would do in case of the improv. That's what you have to do with improv. You have to have such a big stack. I've got such a big stack of poetry that I can grab it from anywhere, and it's still my words, but that I have no script for the movie. It's just because I even attempted to read the poetry book, and it gives you powers of the mind after that. But the John Cassavetes was method, theater, big. He put it in his acting sense. They said he could act. He's in The Killers. Ronald Reagan's the bad guy in that. And I like Ronald Reagan being the bad guy with a gun, because Ronald Reagan will be blaming Martin Scorsese for some dude shooting at him saying he's looking for Jodie Foster. Well, take a number, dude, because whenever I say I'm looking for Jodie Foster, I get shot at. So, and it's usually by someone that looks like Ronald Reagan, which we won't go into, but John Cassavetes' Shadows is his first film. It's his debut film, 1959, and that he could only do a few theater roles to pay for Shadows is amazing, and that he got the actors from Shadows for the movie is interesting because it's the most successful crossover film. Now that it's improv is going to get really interesting because it's a jazz movie. It's an African-American movie, basically, but that John Cassavetes is a white guy from the Bronx, which, by the way, nobody really notices this, but Cassavetes and Stanley Kubrick kind of had the same accent, but Stanley Kubrick sounds more raspy because he wasn't a smoker, and John Cassavetes was a chain smoker, so his voice sounded perfect, like he was, you know, Julianne Moore and Big Lebowski or something. No, what was his name? Anyway, just kidding. John Cassavetes' Shadows. So it's an African-American cast, which is nothing like you've seen a white director ever do, except for maybe the old days when they were kind of racist with Hallelujah and Cabin in the Sky, those Vincent Minnelli kind of experiments of the 30s that were sound films. Cabin in the Sky is 40s, and Hallelujah is not Vincent Minnelli, but that they're an all-black cast in a black movie is kind of almost the throwback to vaudeville, because it's like, we're just going to make these films. But that is kind of interesting how those films are like kind of blaxploitation right now, and this is not blaxploitation, although it's an independent film that John Cassavetes raised all the money for. Now that in terms of independence, Buster Keaton was an independent director. He paid for all his films, he paid for all his publicity. That he got the money from early films that he didn't direct was one thing, but he directed most of his features just because the studio said, bet you could do it better on your own, and they had faith in him. So independent, but still kind of hooked up with sets and movie sounds and stuff. Charlie Chaplin had United Artists, so he's not on that list. But then the next one you see, Griffith wasn't an independent. He was always looking for financiers, losing his own money, gaining the financiers' money back, and playing the whole, I made $1 million, give it to the financiers so they put the movie out, so they can have enough money to distribute it. See, it's only fair even on the internet that we pay something for distribution, because to run 900 copies of my movie at once, which is how many is going to be watched tonight, then they'll be like, well, we have to run 900 copies of an hour-long movie. That's 900 hours of internet time that some engineer is just like not getting paid for. And so it's even harder when you got movies to mail out, even though it's digital email, to get it to the theater nowadays with the package. It doesn't matter. The distribution cost is an arm and a leg, and the studios sometimes back distribution cost, no collateral, said no one ever. It's probably a mistake of the studio, because they're going to need that money to even put the film out. That they give money back to the filmmaker is in the hopes that they'll make another film. Because otherwise it'd be like embezzling. Well, we made Springtime for Hitler, made a ton of money, now we're going to run off. Or make Springtime for Hitler 2, like the studio wants us to lose our money on, to get us back. Now the African Americans in this aren't stereotyped at all. I wouldn't even dare say archetype, because archetype to me is starting to sound like a mythological stereotype, and the word type is making it sound like a mask wearer, and making it sound like a stereotype in general. So I'm careful now by saying we want archetypes. What I meant by that is depthful characters, and archetypes are depthful characters, but usually kind of fetishized as heroes is kind of what Shadows avoid. Is totally what Shadows avoids altogether, because they're normal everyday. That they're great jazz players is no rip to that. He's a white guy making a black movie, so they've got to be jazz players. No, this is the 50s, when it's still unfaithful to show anyone but Louis Armstrong with a trumpet, because no one wants to see a regular kind of a great jazz musician go through struggles on the street to get where he needs to go. Interesting about Shadows that it's all African Americans kind of struggling on the street, and some shots were used in like the mean streets we talked about last time, because Shadows really blew away Martin Scorsese when he saw it, and he thought John Cassavetes got to be friends with him. He's, Rosemary's Baby has John Cassavetes in it, and he used that money to pay for A Woman Under the Influence, which is a lecture in itself. I will admit, though, John Cassavetes in Rosemary's Baby reminds me of the whole smoking gun theory, because in Rosemary's Baby's publicity, William Castle, another producer that I can't think of, and the Mansons with the Beatles and Sharon Tate not being in it, Roman Polanski finding her dead while making that film, and that there's a scene with Anton LaVey, and it all goes down in my Kenneth Anger book called Lucifer Rising, where Kenneth Anger bludgeons a Manson, whether or not he knew it was a Manson. And I think that John Cassavetes pulls the smoking gun and says Rosemary's Baby wasn't a conspiracy. I'll tell you why. Because the movie itself is about a conspiracy, like Eyes Wide Shut, for instance. But Eyes Wide Shut may have been more real than you think. Not that that prostitute chick that was in the movie died, because she's still hanging out at the Cannes Film Festival waiting for me to show up. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, The fact that John Cassavetes in Rosemary's Baby says he's going to make a movie, get an acting job, get a directing job in television by selling his soul to the devil. Good one. Because at first when I saw that, I thought, well, everybody in Hollywood, the minute you get there, has to sell your soul to the devil or they shoot you. I mean, that's just obvious. That's been going on since Lillian Gish at the swastika on her forehead and wrote 666 above it and burned herself in ashes in Kenneth Anger's first transmuted film that he filmed from the belly of his mother when he was just but an egg. And I can explain to you about that, how in Hollywood you're allowed to be a Satanist. If you're a Scientologist, then you're way worse than a Satanist, so they love you immediately. And if you're Catholic, you have to go work with the Italians on a gangster film, unless it's Tarantino, because he only quoted the Bible once, and I know he's God now because I've never heard the Bible quoted so amazingly. Not even by Jesse Jackson have I heard the words of Samuel L. Jackson, Ezekiel 35:14. I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brother. And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee. That was kind of my John Cassavetes Brooklyn accent. That doesn't fly in John Cassavetes cinema, though, because that's like an exaggeration. By the way, I'm not God. That was me doing a scene from Pulp Fiction, which ends up being a Bible study, and that's the only thing that venerates it from being otherwise the most despicably immoral film, because you think, Pulp Fiction's pretty immoral in that, like, they're getting gone with the wind on morality laws for racism, and Pulp Fiction's playing every night on FX, and the edited version puts in all the bloodier scenes. I'm thinking, well, if Pulp Fiction somehow becomes more moral than Birth of a Nation, that will ruin Birth of a Nation for me. Because not that I don't think it's immoral and detestable, Birth of a Nation, and I completely don't think it should ever have a remake on the screen, or except that one where they threw in Nat Turner and he ate all those babies. Oh, that was the comedy version. Well, if they're going to do a bad Birth of a Nation or a springtime for Birth of a Nation, don't blame me. But if they're going to do a like mock-up musical where everybody's singing along happy songs to Pulp Fiction, that'd be the only way to make Pulp Fiction more offensive. Especially if the songs were like Christian Jesus Loves You type songs and they put it all in, took out the bad words and kept the Bible study in. Man, Samuel L. Jackson. Alright, so the point is that like Quentin Tarantino's more of an expressionist. He aims his buildings wide, and by that I mean he's got the widest of the widescreen except for maybe Cinerama. That his colors are blue, orange, yellow, beautiful primaries, beautiful, everything resonates like the digital and film colliding. That everything Tarantino does in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is flawless because he follows Brad Pitt around in his car for 20 minutes and none of us even noticed that there was no cut in the take, like in a gun crazy shot at the Rob Banks scene. But the Rob Banks scene was handheld and it looked like they stationaried the camera in Brad Pitt's car. John Cassavetes, we could say impressionistic, except it's improv. Impressionistic would imply that it's bits and pieces. I think of Robert Bresson when I think of that, though, or Jean Vigo, where it's a small item representing the large. It's a hearing the sound of a key coming up the bars that, you know, that you get the picture of the warden coming up to warn him, you know, that it's going to catch him at escaping. And that it's, like, not really an anticlimactic movie, A Man Escaped. It functions like a Hitchcock film, but by the time he gets out of there, you feel like you escaped with him in Bresson's film, to the point that you just lived the movie, and you feel more relieved than you do at the end of Shawshank Redemption, when he, like, totally redeems everything, gets the prison warden shot up, and everybody cheers happy ending. But that, I think I've got the point clear that in A Man Escaped, melancholy approaches us. When we almost died, our friend died, everything went wrong, and we still got out somehow and walked away. That's a pretty straight-looking walk there for a guy that's in a French film, non-professional actor. He looks like Pierce Brosnan, and we're still kind of worried that he's a little shaken up from losing his friend. But hey, at least he's free. It's like Grand Illusion. The other guy died and I get free, but all we're going to do in the movie is dwell on it. Well, with Bresson, it's like Grand Illusion, but you can't dwell on it. You got to get it out of there. War's going on, and you probably have to fight your way back to your lines just to get put in your prison for maybe having been tortured to tell information. Now, I keep getting off the subject of John Cassavetes, and there's only a couple more films I'd mention him in besides The Killers and Rosemary's Baby. But those are the only ones I'm actually going to mention because he's not off character in The Killers where he's the good guy. And he plays the race car guy and everything's cool with him and he's like the big bad Dudley Do-Right. But again, the smoking gun of Rosemary's Baby is John Cassavetes to say he would sell his soul to the devil because everyone sold their soul to the devil in Hollywood, maybe even John Cassavetes, but that's not what he did to get ahead in the movies. Because see, he never got ahead in the movies. Maybe opening night in Gloria was Gina Rowland's dowry savings or something. But he's never really gotten ahead. Love Streams was kind of an expensive movie, but that it was like Shortcuts by the Moonlit Night. You know, it was a real languish film, and so he did have budgets. So he did sell the soul of the devil, right? But not to be the most successful director in Hollywood, which would have repugnated Scorsese to have been, not because he was ever mad and not mad at Scorsese. And everybody knows Scorsese takes the title, and then Spielberg kind of preaches to him from an even further place above, and then Scorsese gets up to the Spielberg level, and then suddenly Spielberg's looking up to get over at Scorsese level, and now they just leveled up to where it's just they're both on level 99, and you know they can't go any further in Skyrim. Like all the adventures are gone, but they're the greatest, and everybody always says they're the greatest, and then it regrets it. They're like, well, they're commercial filmmakers. Everybody likes them, and gosh, if everybody liked them, maybe they'd be wrong. And John Cassavetes, not everybody's going to like. It's very inaccessible, to steal a film school word. It's very challenging. The improv that they're recording is the things they're coming up with on the set at that time. Goodfellas has an improv where Ray Liotta and Joe Pesci and De Niro are all in a scene, and all of a sudden Ray Liotta starts laughing so hard he almost chokes, and he's like, "You're a funny guy," to Joe Pesci, and Joe Pesci's like, "What do you mean I'm funny? Funny, haha? Funny looking? What do you mean funny?" And it's making him laugh and laugh and laugh. He's like, "I'm going to shoot you if you don't stop laughing. You better not think I'm funny." And so he's like, "Whoa," and he's still laughing, and he's like, okay, he's going to shoot you. And he stops laughing, and he goes, "You're a funny guy," and starts laughing again. That whole scene was improv. Now think of the things that could have went wrong on that, but that they had movie conditions to be safety on the set. Even during improv is obvious because there's so much paperwork you have to fill out on your own notes to make it choose your own adventure be an improv, because you kind of give an idea for the film. Well, Gina Rowlands in A Woman Under the Influence has just been picked up from the hospital, comes home, is still very shaky and not ready to be out of the hospital, but wants to be out but then has 3 nervous breakdowns in 2.5 hours of film, and it's all recorded as bits and pieces of an almost real-time breakdown where she goes up and down in her bipolar stress or whatever it is. I don't know if she's schizophrenic in the film because they say you have to see things and hear things, which you kind of do, but that movie doesn't do anything metaphysical like that. Like Beautiful Mind, the guy's reaching out to his ghost or whatever. Or not reaching out to his ghost is even metaphysical, because that just leaves the ghost on camera sitting there going, "Why didn't you hug me?" Gina Rowlands wasn't even mentally ill. She wasn't mentally ill. She studied the part. She method act, theater acted it. Never has there been a better performance of a woman going insane. And so many people accused her of going to a dark place in her own life, but she's a Lee Strasberg, Boleshevsky, Stanislavski. We're going to go for it real by learning it from real people, acting like it, and it's an act. And if she went mentally ill in the film, from making the film, they would have banned the film, because Hollywood has this thing about reckless endangerment. That if Gina Rowlands wouldn't have been an opening night and later film, and being a Shakespearean actress in that, but kind of Betty Davis, am I getting too old for this Sunset Boulevard mode? But then realizing she's better looking than Betty Davis, well, young Betty Davis was pretty beautiful, but even now Voyager makes me wonder if Gina Rowlands was not something there. Gina Rowlands, by the way, is an incredible actress that she still went on to do The Notebook and The Two Ks, which was John Cassavetes' son, Nick Cassavetes, means that Nick Cassavetes, although not a sellout, did actually make Hollywood big blockbuster films. That The Notebook cost twice as much as all of Cassavetes, his father's films put together, is not even an exaggeration, except The Killing of the Chinese Bookie would have been more expensive if it were made today, because getting those permits to shoot there were nearly impossible anyway. Some people did him favors for that film. That John Cassavetes worked as an actor in all these films set him up to be a director, but that he was making independent films. Like I was going to talk about Oscar Micheaux after Birth of a Nation. He was the next independent after Buster Keaton, and around the same time as Buster Keaton. Oscar Micheaux, I've seen 4 of his films, Body and Soul, Within Our Gates. Those are the 2 I come up with more. And it's got some of Paul Robeson in them. And, Oscar Micheaux is a lesson in and of itself, and I don't even know how to begin to teach that he's the first African-American director, because he directs as good as Quentin Tarantino, if not better, and he kind of summed up that whole blaxploitation style, while at the same time being classical Hollywood, and being a slave revolt, and having the Hood movie thrown in, and being in 1919. And I'm not being archetypal or stereotypal, because Oscar Micheaux was no archetype. He walked straight up to Griffith, said, "Your film offended me. It's my favorite movie ever made. Give me money because I said that. I'll make a movie that you don't have any control over, and it's going to be so much better than yours, but yours is the best movie ever made, so mine will suck." And that's movie speak for I'll pay for anything you owe, for even being black and mentioning that you liked Birth of a Nation. Griffith picked up $50,000 and said, "Make sure this one flops," and that. But it was eventually a UA release, and that United Artists Chaplin, United Artists Griffith, United Artists Fairbanks, United Artists Pickford. And then out of them, I've seen very few Pickford films. But Tessa, the Storm Country, both versions I think she's in, and it's a mind-blowing experience. It's like watching Lillian Gish in The Wind, only the melodrama versus the action film that will later turn into movies like The Turin Horse. The Wind and The Turin Horse have a lot in common. The Wind by Victor Streestrom, Lillian Gish is indoors, but the wind is destroying everything and causing rafters to blow open, and she's acting in this kind of, it's like if Buster Keaton's hurricane didn't hit him, it hit Lillian Gish, and this is before Buster Keaton's Steamboat Bill Jr. Oscar Micheaux, I can only say, is probably in my daring top 10 favorite director list, except that I'm not really allowed to, because he made several films that he only wanted black people to see, and I'm cool with that. I won't watch them. Like at first I was like, I bet I'd be the only white guy that would be able to watch those and think they're good. Obviously, you've seen Within Our Gates, you know it's going to be good. But if he wants a privileged space where they can discuss what they want, white people get that. Privileged space where they can go to discuss what they want. What's the big fucking deal about that? Because it might not make as much money if it only goes to the blacks. Some rich black dude stands up, I'll compensate for him. This is Oscar Micheaux. He's got a big entourage. Micheaux did have a lot of bad black preachers that were about to get ripped apart by the congregation if they did anything wrong. It was interesting because he had a high regard for all black people and kind of said, in a way in these movies, that the black people in this church are going to rail on their pastor anyway, and the pastor knows it, so he's going to go nuts, and then that's why they're going to rail him. That kind of seems why I'm avoiding the word architect. Because that would turn directly into a stereotype, and that means all black preachers are corrupt. Paul Robeson has this all black preacher corrupt in body and soul, where he's kind of like getting it on with some dude's daughter, and it's kind of hot. You're kind of like, when you're young, you're like, these films kind of excite me. When I saw it, I kind of felt bad for Paul Robeson that he had to become a preacher just to hide that he was a convict, because reading the Bible for him must have been torture, with it being the version where African Americans were like satanic or something. There's so many versions of the Bible where black guys the Satan. They didn't just take that out of the Bible. There's some that still have it in it. But we don't need to go there. Let's move on. That might be why Michelle used bad preachers, is because the copies of the Bible they had back then said bad things about black people, mainly to get back at the fact that there were more Islamic people on earth than there were Christians. And we all know there's more Catholics, actually, but Catholics are slowly detaching themselves from the word Christian because it sounds like one of those evangelical preachers they're always giving money to and getting cured from. No, instead of going to confession, no. I confess to you I had more to talk about tonight, and I'm interloping some intertextual dimensions for creativity on film work. That film criticism can be kind of creative. We see that with Leonard Maltin, we see that with Roger Ebert. So Roger Ebert could spill a pop in a soda and never mention it until his last article, and he's like, the only movie I've ever spilled a soda in. And that his meticulous attention to detail would be Home Alone 2, because Donald Trump came. Oh, I said the word. Saw there's someone running around on flames back there. I got to apologize to my cousin Jason Sheley. Please don't ban this from the internet, dude. I needed you to ban that other stuff from the internet. And Trump had to be banned from the internet. I understand. And I've been a lot happier since he has been. But don't ban me for saying his name. Unless I say something nice about him, then you can just cancel this whole show. No, he did give me money once, but I don't know if that's saying something nice about him. Then I probably would have said thanks for the money and tear down your wall with your own money. And if he had a bag of weed on him, then I'd have given him this money and told him to keep the weed because I'd have suddenly gained respect for him. Now, these are not sellout movies. The improv in Shadows is as meticulous as his Woman Under the Influence. That John Cassavetes also directed Husbands, which don't get that confused with Husbands and Wives by Woody Allen or Blind Husbands by Erich von Stroheim, the mountain movie where everybody's trying to ditch each other in the mountains and get with the other person. That Cassavetes' Husbands isn't Husbands and Wives, but Woody Allen took it as a Blind Husbands reference, or Husbands and Wives, because Woody Allen's like, what titles can I really scandalizingly show up in the video store next to? Would be that he wanted his video next to Husbands. That could be an urban legend, because Woody Allen may never even knew if VCRs existed, too, on the other hand. So there are few theories on that. But Shadows and Husbands, now that we've defined that as a Cassavetes film, and Opening Night, which is a little different because it's more theatrical than it is method, but it's still method theatrical because they're studying how theatrical actors work, and that you, again, to be a theater star, to be an actor star, you had to know the method anyway. That's why a friend of mine even told me, he's like, he asked me, is Buster Keaton a method actor? And I said, absolutely yes. Of course Buster Keaton's a method actor. He trained in vaudeville in straightforward, archetypal, stereotypal performances. But that's vaudeville, to exaggerate and be out there. Different kind of exaggeration than the Tarantino matter of fact, in your face, sometimes shit goes wrong narrative. It's more like Buster Keaton's just showing us that his movie's falling apart, and he's falling apart with it, and that's what his movies are about. Is him directing till it falls apart. Bouchot, I'm not going to write a book on, but I have written about 200 pages on the guy in some Birth of the Nation issues I did. And I was not even offended that he had movies that he only wanted black people to see, and I'm cool with that. It's an indie thing. If you're an indie god, that means you paid your own money to make the movie, you put it out with your own money, you screened it with your own money, and if a studio's name ever got on it later, it's because one of the two of you died and got rights to a film that was actually making money and now distributed onto home video. That films have been lost that were independent films is no doubt. Stan Brakhage is an independent filmmaker, and we think he lost about 30 films just in the make of making so many, which I can relate to. Because I've made about 150 films, and 135, but 136 somewhere, and feature films, and it's like, well, some of them disappeared, and you're like, well, at least the last three didn't. The one that disappeared I needed bad for the rest of my career, but not as bad as I needed this week's episode. You know. But improv is like I can relate to improv because I improv music, which is unheard of. It's like they only do that on Whose Line Is It Anyway, and that like I sound like the Whose Line It Anyway guys doing it is hilarious because I mean it's like I'm good at improv. I could be better. Actually, some really big industryites are saying I'm one of the better improvers ever. That I've improv so much that it's like cowboy poetry improv at this point, and that I'm not a cowboy but kind of a redneck, and it's a hard to explain story because I live in Colorado. But again, before you get down on us for, again, like having an anti-Semitic kind of ideology around this place that doesn't exist here because nobody would even know a Jew if they saw one here, is just an interfere that they really will tell you that Mel Brooks really was Jewish, and since everyone here loves Blazing Saddles so much, it will offend them to find out that Jesus or Mel Brooks, whoever you choose first, was Jewish. And I don't mean to say that as malicious against anyone that doesn't believe that. But Cassavetes, and I'm improving now. That's what's so great. I don't have a script for this. I'm not reading this off a teleprompter. See, the other day, one of my people was watching MASTERCLASS, and they're like, there's improv coming. He's getting not this from improv. It's printing out the words underneath him, and then he's waiting for the teleprompter. Well, I must have some badass eye movements because I was pretending there was a teleprompter when I was saying my usual stuff and pretending there's a teleprompter, but I couldn't see the words, so I pretended the words were there. That means I had to improv the teleprompter. I don't know how you could teleprompter something like this, but if you've got an idea, tell me and I'll just write up the whole speech and it'll be just like my Citizen Kane A+ paper for USC Film School. I'll be sitting there typing it and I'll be like, the transgression of an early era takes place in the form of things we still see manifest in the metaphors of today's socialistic, ideological hodgepodge of beliefs that somehow disqualify us all from being equal humans based on divisions that we've made divisive ourselves because usually media is a divisive, isolationist media that even the modern era, which allowed other points of view, isolated those points of view to only they could see it. And we're not going to blame Oscar Michaud for that, though. No, that was a little joke of mine. So, moving on, who are the other indie gods? Well, Herc Hurdy's an indie god, and I'm kind of like him, actually, because it's like he didn't have enough budget for but one movie. Just enough budget for one movie. It was like his Blair Witch Project, and it had to work. He's in Wyoming, where there's still not a film scene. He's kind of a weird-looking dude, so he can kind of make tricks and substitute, and there's no real stunts in the movie, but it's called Carnival of Souls. And if you're a horror buff, it's got to be in your top 10 horror, because this guy made one of the cheapest movies, cheaper than Blair Witch Project, made way more money than Blair Witch Project for the horror business, that everybody was second billing all their horror films all the way through the 80s with Carnival of Souls, meant that film has a longer shelf life than almost any other. Look, then people will stop knowing what Blair Witch Project is, not if I can help it. But they'll never stop Carnival of Souls from snowballing its way to the Criterion now that it's in Criterion. And I sent a used copy to my teacher once because I was poor and I could only get the used copy, but it wasn't scratched too bad except for when I tried to see if there were really ghosts trapped in the DVD. And Carnival of Souls is a movie about this lady who's walking around this town and people, the soundtrack's all muffled up. Either the people can't talk to her, they're frozen in time, they don't even see her, they bump into her, she's walking around like she's not there. It's like being at the mall going the wrong direction from everybody going the other way, and how they choreographed that so meticulously. They must have had storyboards, and they must have had a real camera too. That there's a little bit of a glitch in the transfer I have is only because I keep buying cheaper copies because I keep giving copies away. And usually you have to buy the more expensive copy if you give it away. But in the case of Carnival of Souls, I'm trying to get Herc Hervey his 25 cents he's still owed for that movie for putting up 50 grand of his farm on it, and that he bankrupted the farm kind of bothered him when he felt that it was kind of a bad film. But I heard Manos Hands of Fate had a bigger budget and flopped 10 times as hard and is still a Mystery Science Theater movie. But I'm not going to bag Manos Hands of Fate on Carnival of Souls territory because Carnival of Souls made Nano's Hands of Fate available to be made. Like it was, this Carnival of Souls has so much more to do with filmmaking, that we're all in this big carnival in the film, and that our souls may be on the screen. If we're dead after the movie comes out, our soul was with us when we were alive, so our soul is still in us. So the souls of those people who are in that movie at least related to when they shot it. They shot it with their souls in it. If their souls leapt out of the movie when they died, maybe they're just vapid cassettes. But if you saw the movie when it came out, maybe it wasn't their souls, because it was their people who were alive. But if they had their souls when they were alive, then the film captured what their soul would be like. And that's why the movie doesn't change theory. It's kind of scary, because Herc Herbie is probably dead, but his soul is in that movie. And that everybody's a ghost rather than a soul, and they're all aggregating and conflagrating towards this big out-of-town carnival. And this lead female protagonist, who dies in a car crash at the beginning, but you're not sure that she's dead until the very end. Another one of those Occurrence at Owl Creek moments that the whole movie was going through her head when she was dying in her car. But that she's in her car, and at the end, before she wakes up dead, she's driving to the carnival, and weird things are going on. Weird lights. It's scary. It's scary. It's scary. The ghosts in this movie are mean, scary, won't let you do anything, and are like the frustrating things in dreams that impede you, that you can't do anything about. Sometimes you can just wake up, flick your nose, go back to sleep, and the dream gets good, and everything's working out, right? Or you're sleeping with someone, and they see you having a bad dream, they flick your nose, suddenly you're in the Pinocchio movie, everything's cool. Even though that's kind of a nightmare too, and it's one of the scariest horror films I've ever seen, Pinocchio. Not Pinocchio's Revenge, that's a cute Disney movie. Shadows, Husbands, Opening Night, Love Streams, Killing of a Chinese Bookie, Woman Under the Influence. And there's one I'm missing, and it's a really good one, so I apologize for not getting the whole deck of Cassavetes, and I'm thinking of the one, Faces. Let's face it, Martin Scorsese's better at this, because on his special, he had his notes arranged, or whether he used notes or not, I don't know. He probably has 900 notes he doesn't even look through, like most of us directors. They were just written, so he'd get it in his brain that he wrote it, and could secretly sneak to the stack and get a tip from himself later. It's cool. But that Faces is an amazing movie that I didn't cover, even in my film theoretics, and I apologize. I tried to sneak it back in somewhere, but I had to do those books off book, and I got to the Cassavetes, which, by the way, Cassavetes is spelled Cassavetes. Not two T's, not two V's, two S's. Cassavetes. Now, if you're going to write a paper on Cassavetes, make sure you know that, because if you start doing two T's and two V's and leave only one S, you'll get graded off a ton for missing the director's name. Now, one thing that's cool about film schools everywhere is that if you're writing an actor's name and a character's name, forget it. You don't have to memorize the character's name in a movie to even write a book-worthy notion of the movie. That most book-worthy movies are like, you better learn the name of that character that the actor plays. Because if you don't, then we're going to think, it's like, learn the name of the actor that plays, otherwise you're not worthy of the film you're doing. Well, some films obscure the names and even put them in the credits. So now we're watching the credits and we're like, that guy's name was Jim Beam? Oh, he was only in 2 minutes of The Apostle. Oh, wait, that was the bottle he was drinking. Offset. Special thanks to Jim Beam. Yeah. Faces is interesting because it's an improv movie after Shadows, and it's about 8 years later because Cassavetes has to recoup through a series of nightmarish performances leading up to Rosemary's Baby, which was a total hoax because he never sold his soul to anyone. John Cassavetes is probably the only non-sellout director there is. That he took money for Killing of a Chinese Bookie doesn't make him a sellout because it was money he made, but he didn't even like to use the money he made on anything except give it to Gina Rowlands, and Gina Rowlands kind of took care of going to the store and buying things and buying houses for him because he didn't want to be the accountant, and most directors don't. There's a reason why. See, when John Ford was talking to an interviewer, maybe even Peter Bogdanovich, he's like, you know how you know who the director is? He's the guy that's giving out the money. That he has money at all is already a question about whether he's the director or not, because the director never has money, but he's paid money only once so that he can pay everybody that's working for him. And usually that's on the set with John Ford. So John Ford's a real director because he'll see an actor and he'll give him money. And he'll give him more money. And then he'll see a kid that needs to buy a lollipop that's going to be in the movie, and he'll give him money. But by the time he's given everybody on the set, the intern, he gives him money to go get the intern his own coffee, because that's really all that interns can afford is coffee for themselves, and that they always brew up a cup at their own house and bring it back to the director, who loves it even better than Starbucks. Anyway, tips and production assistant. It doesn't matter because John Cassavetes is not a sellout. And what I'm getting at is Rosemary's Baby makes him look like a sellout, even for the devil. Now, that John Cassavetes was in league with the devil is because Kenneth Anger made all filmmakers have to do that when the film Illuminati came out. But in seriousness, John Cassavetes may have sold his soul to the devil, blah, 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 but it obviously wasn't to be a big film career. It wasn't for a film career, and if it was, what a great film career he had, but how much fame he did not gain is true, because not many people that are watching this go, I've never even heard of that guy. I know who he is in The Dirty Dozen. Oh, he's that guy from The Dirty Dozen? He rocks. But he didn't direct The Dirty Dozen like Clint Eastwood directs his own Rambo films. And Clint Eastwood's amazing, but we'll talk about him some other time. But Cassavetes is the revolutionary independent director, avoided selling out like Musso and Kirk Hervey, and Ida Lupino is pretty independent. That she's a female director at all in the era of the blacklist is kind of scary, because if a female was directing, they'd automatically relate it to communism, you know, which they didn't want to send Ida Lupino to prison, but that she probably snuck them food into prison already made them feel bad that she had to make all the food, because Ida Lupino was so independent that to cook blacklist food for her was probably so not humiliating for her, because she had a great apple souffle. You know what I'm getting at? Now, we're going to have a second part on Cassavetes and on even just on Shadows, because we're really getting going in this movie theory class, and I'm feeling good about what we're teaching now. So what we're teaching now is some kind of a prelude to what's to come is getting exciting, but that we haven't learned much about this movie. Let me just say that there's other jazz movies that came out around this time weren't the same kind of jazz movie. You had a jazz movie called Elevator to the Gallows by Louis Malle, which is a French guy who's a famous actor in the role. And again, I don't have to have the name of the character, sometimes not even the actor, to explain it. Even in film papers, you don't always have to have the main character's name, unless it's Taxi Driver Travis Bickle or Gone with the Wind, Rhett Butler. Any other character's name you don't really need to know in movies. Vincent and Vega, you get mixed up because you know they're in Pulp Fiction, but little do you know they do give their last names. And nobody knows that the guy in Clockwork Orange's name is Alex DeLarge, and everybody wants to call him Alex McDowell, as though Roddy McDowell. No, they want to call him Alex DeLarge in the film, and we all know that actor isn't Alex DeLarge. Let's just leave it at that. And I've met that actor, and he's not Alex DeLarge. But he's pretty cool, and he's probably killed more people in more insane ways, because that's how you live in L.A. You probably just have to kill someone even to get out of the parking lot these days. You're like, well, They Were Expendable is on my TV, so let's check it out. Now, The Shadows is a really good movie, and it really treats the subject of race really meticulously, in that it treats it in an unstereotypical way. Dare I may even say unarchetypal way. There's this whole brotherhood of jazz musicians. One of them falls in love with a lighter-skinned girl. A dark-skinned girl ironically and strangely enough, falls in love with a lighter-skinned guy. That all their skin is toned and that everyone in the film is basically black is like a neighborhood I want to go to, because I want to go preach to them that they were gods for letting the god of independent filmmaking debut himself as now we're looking at maybe the best indie director of all time. And that there aren't really any independent directors following John Cassavetes except like Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol was around John Cassavetes' time though too, and that Stan Brakhage and Kenneth Anger were independent filmmakers, but they're usually classified as avant-garde. So for guerrilla cinema, make it just jump into a movie and make it. Just bring a camera, run to the set, and make a movie. That's guerrilla cinema. But verite, where the improv is making it seem realistic, is now they're using their mind to transmute to the character's mind what they should be saying off the top of their head. So they're thinking of what the character should be saying at this moment and saying it, and that they're all flawless at it because they've been in all these plays by John Cassavetes where he's been improving everything from the start was what he wanted to do with cinema, and that he succeeded, that a woman under the influence is not a real Gina Rowlands going insane, but I love that people get that mixed up. It's just like Rosemary's Baby wasn't a conspiracy to really kill the Antichrist, because John Cassavetes wouldn't sell out in a million years. If he already had, he would have already negotiated the soul back, lent him his killing of a Chinese bookie, Buddhist implications to the devil, and we'd be fine. But opening night is the one where they're in the theater, and that Gina Rowlands' aging career, and that she is actually playing her final performance before her understudy gets in and teaches things, and that he improvs like that. I can improv on a song and people are impressed. Like I wrote this song called Confederate Atheist, which was like a cross between Within Our Gates and Birth of a Nation. It was another one of those. Civil War, pointless to dig up Civil War information now, but do it anyway because we're obsessed with it. Kind of me, I'm obsessed with the Civil War and I don't get why. It's nonsense. It's nonsensical, the Civil War. War to me is nonsense. So that an improv of a song would be difficult, but that there are other improv artists, especially jazz artists, can improv a song and never play the same one twice. That's what got jazz in the background, but they're listening to me at the same time, so they're trying not to laugh. Now, the African Americans in this are middle class to lower class. Pretty good lifestyle, pretty good black neighborhood. Everybody treats them good. The controversy that goes through their families, when a guy likes a lighter-skinned girl, a black guy likes a lighter-skinned girl, and a lighter-skinned guy a black guy falls in love with a lighter-skinned girl, a black girl falls in love with a lighter-skinned white guy, and that the film makes a big blowout about the fact that everybody's nervous about interracial relationships. It's like, bam, I knew they had miscegenation in the 50s. There were laws that said you couldn't get married as black and white. There are theorists nowadays that said when a black guy and a white guy get together, it's usually because that's a gay couple, and that does happen. But when a white guy gets with a black woman, there's even theories that they shouldn't do that because the white guy is going to dominate her like he would his slave. Is like being stuck in the Civil War still. And I'm thinking, well, I've known, you can quote me on this in front of the D.W. Griffith Clan Society. I've had black girlfriends that were hot. My idea was not to dominate them. They did not dominate me either. We were friends. We were in love. We said nice things to each other and knew when the drawing board had to be gone to on our own. And I feel that's Cassavetes' thing, because never once did I detect any hint of racism when they were pointing it out. I didn't point it out and then say it was a good thing that they can't fall in love, and that they all fall in love and do what they want. It's so elliptical about this movie that they're in a jazz club once, and there's a jazz club movie called Last Night or One More Night, that deals with kind of this long tracking shot of a jazz musician at his last performance. But this one is kind of a different one because they're playing jazz some of the time. Some of the time they're just sitting around at like restaurants eating, and then all those scenes get used in Pulp Fiction and stuff, and then you're like making the essential black movie, but the essential black movie is actually Sweetback's badass song is the true meaning of Within Our Gates, because Within Our Gates is actually just by a little bit better than that. And that Spike Lee's Malcolm X exists in a godlike realm that's going to offend everyone for me saying this. But out of all those movies that were coming out about presidents and people and things that were important, we all found out that Malcolm X really was the most important person of the 20th century. And if Spike Lee doesn't convince you of that, then it isn't because he showed the right movie, because it's the Spike Lee movie to say he was a nice guy, Malcolm X. He preached of peace, Malcolm X. But that there's an offensive scene of him praying in Islam is only offensive to those that want to censor movies. And I don't want to censor a movie. Censorship should get censored. The only thing that needs censored is censorship itself. All we have to censor is censorship itself. Now I'm going to stretch this class out a little bit, because lately there's been some censorship going around on the internet that you can't even talk about Russian movies on some websites that are pro-Russian movies. Now, I'm just going to tell you something that's a little controversial here. I love movies. Now, I love Russian movies as an extension of I love movies. Now that I love Ashes and Diamonds is a Russian movie. Now that I love all the way back to Battleship Potemkin, Storm Over Asia, whichever one was the first film. I love that Russian directors had to edit Intolerance to make it a different movie, and they keep turning it in as a real version, and no one knows which one it is, because Griffith got the Russian dupe right away. Not kidding. They all went to the same film club and switched copies of Metropolis on each other, and D.W. Griffith had to take them all back and re-edit it 4 ways. No. But that you would put a statement about war and peace or crime and punishment, both Russian novels, on a Facebook post, and somebody could confuse you with being pro-contemporary Russia. Like, if you think I like Putin killing innocent Ukrainians just because I like the movie Russian Ark being filmed in one take, you don't know me. Because I'll watch a liberal film, I'll watch a conservative film, I'll watch Reefer Madness, maybe never again, because Griffith really hated Reefer Madness, because he was trying to get weed legalized for Louis Armstrong, right, who fought in the war with him. And that Griffith became a communist is suddenly the new thing at Berkeley, because for a while Berkeley was losing me on the Griffith train when it started going toward the Buster Keaton aisle. Like he's making the Klansmen look like the Keystone Cop, maybe, is a theory. But Griffith himself would make these movies that would have these errors in them, and it's all grotesque now too, so isn't the point. The point is that there probably hadn't been a fair share of black cinema, except for Within Our Gates, all the way up to basically when, who was it? I wanted to say Don Cheadle came as an actor, but that's a little later on.
I've now moved to New Jersey. I'm a professor at a state school in New Jersey. I'm sitting in my 1-bedroom apartment.
Sorry, I got quiet there for a minute. I just got lost track on a few things, and I'm not going to delete this, and I'm going to go on. But we're going to switch back to the Cast of Editors topic and close it off and close this class off, because just for a preview for next time, I might get a little rowdy too then. I might get a little rowdy too then. I might say that this was a Sidney Poitier movie, but it wasn't. All That Heaven Allows, I wanted to get to tonight, and it has a lot of theatrical camera use. And my friend, my colleague, my peer, and my boss, Matt Klickstein, he did argue that All That Heaven Allows by Douglas Sirk, who's also a domestic melodrama genreist to the end and only did those kind of movies and put his stamp on it that way and he was one of those, if I have any money, I'm not the director, I paid everybody the money they paid me to pay the money back to them. And that's a director, they would say. But All That Heaven Allows is Douglas Sirk. He wasn't an independent. He was working for MGM, wasn't he? Or big companies were taking his films. And then he's a little exaggerated. Maybe not more than Tarantino's exaggeration, if you think about it. It seems melodramatic. But now that Tarantino looks a little melodramatic, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Rock Hudson is kind of a method actor. He had to learn method acting and theatrical acting. That Rock Hudson is kind of working out as this handsome man. And around this time, around this time that they made this film, his friends may have known that he was gay. But at that time in Hollywood, even though they were experimenting with the idea that it might be okay, it wasn't until really Midnight Cowboy, which has a few problems with it on purpose, that American homosexuality was celebrated in cinema. Yeah, that there'd been a Russian movie in the silent era, Bed and Board, not Francois Truffaut's Bed and Board of the Doinel series, but Bed and Board by the Russians was this three-way threesome, and there were a gay couple in it, you know. But it was really Pasolini's theorem in English. Pasolini, when he was doing his Gospel According to St. Matthew days, around then he made a film called Teorema, which has the best soundtrack to edit something to. It paces the soundtrack just like you'd want to edit a real movie. And that Terence Stamp is in Pasolini's movie is already weird because Pasolini's like in Italy and nobody knows how these people get connections except they travel all around the world. They need a director, they stop and do a film for them. Terence Stamp goes into this domestic situation where there's a nuclear family, woman, man, mom, dad, son, daughter, and they all want to get with him. And the son and the daughter, who are of age in the Italian scheme of things, they weren't like young, they were still living with their parents, right? They, one at a time, every family member sleeps with Terence Stamp. And this would sound disgustingly revolting by today's standards. Oh my gosh, that gay guy fucked that whole family. You know, and I don't mean to be crude, but it's like that. You get to the point where it's like, but Teorema's not like that. They all wanted him. He all wanted them. It was consensual. It was a beautiful act of lovemaking. And then he's got to go hitchhike somewhere else. And when he leaves, the family feels left behind. And that's the theorem. How to explain the theorem in any other way doesn't make sense. It's like, when he's there, erotic orgasm. When he's absent, never have an erotic orgasm again, depression. You know, it's like displacement and how heavy that weighs on people. He knew him for like a day and a half, and they go into misery once he's gone. And the only happy moment of their life was when they were with him. This may seem embarrassingly offensive or out of date, but I say, besides Fox and His Friends, which is 75, these are some bold statements about homosexuality. And Fox and His Friends, I'll give a simple explanation. Fox wanted his gold digger friends to spend all his money on whatever they wanted, leave him for dead. And when they leave him for dead, he's happy because that was his idea. See, he told him he told his lover he wanted him to spend all his money and leave him for dead. And his lover was going to do that anyway in a nefarious plan, but that he laid down dying in a totally content way, kind of, except some kids steal his shoes when he's dead to prove that he's dead. And the ultimate irony, he didn't get to keep anything. But a lot of us watch it and go, wow, if I had won the lottery, I would have invested in Nutri-Grain bars because they're always for sale and I wouldn't lose any money. But that he lavishes on his friend. His friend wrecks the budget every time, and he wrecks the budget. He's like the producer of the film. He just spends it all, but that he let the film be made. But Fox is getting off on the fact that this gay guy is already attracted to him, wants to steal all his money, wants to leave him for dead, and he says to do it in a sincere way. And so I think Fox is true to himself and dies just like the way he would have wanted, with not a penny in the world, because he's not greedy. It'd be like if he said he sold his soul, like Cassavetes, with all the cheap movies that had barely any violence. Now, Gloria, that we didn't talk about, Gloria with Shadows, is a later film with Gina Rowlands, and that she's like a James Bond type chick in it, and that she kills like 6 people or so by shooting them in like Martin Scorsese type ways. It is another testament to how Cassavetes, from Shadows to Faces and ending with Love Streams, is a flawless filmmaker. Brilliant. One of the greats of all time. The only improv artist who could pull off a whole improv movie. And for Hollywood, no less. Where the land of follow the script exactly, he's yelling out ideas to different people at once to get them to try lines, and they get on their own incident. And incidentally, Peter Falk is a pretty good actor, not just for his Wings of Desire cameo with Wim Wenders, that City of Angels remade, with that Arms of the Angels song. No, Wings of Desire is weird because, like, Wim Wenders doesn't just cash in on Peter Falk. Peter Falk plays Peter Falk in the movie and actually talks to an angel, and it almost seems like one of those American TV shows where, like, Michael Landon's the angel. But despite Peter Falk's acting as Peter Falk, we forget that Columbo kind of makes him exaggerated, but we love exaggerated TV. That Columbo is not really translating to his improv, muted performances like Omen Under the Influence. Doesn't underrate him as an actor, and really that he is the storyteller on Princess Bride, which is goldenizes his voice as legend forever. Rock Hudson in All That Heaven Allows, in around, I think it may have been as late as the 80s, maybe late 70s, way after All That Heaven Allows and all his other handsome, dashing roles with Doris Day like Pillow Talk. He comes out of the closet, says he was always gay. And at first, Doris Day took the news pretty hard, but she still wanted to kind of be friends until he was seen to have AIDS. And he asked Doris if he could be on her show and raise money for the cause against the cure of AIDS. And my professor, who's the biggest Doris Day fan of all time, is going to watch this and be like, you better not be mean to Doris Day. She just had a different belief in Christian Science, and she thought that AIDS not being curable by Christian Science was a punishment God put on you for being gay. Now, that attitude still exists even in the reaches of Colorado churches, so we're not going to go down her religious belief well, because anyone that even had a religious belief in Hollywood would have had to have drank their own Kool-Aid by appearing in a movie in the 80s, which was talking about cult leaders drinking Kool-Aid. So, what I'm getting at here is Rock Hudson announcing he was gay, with Doris Day movies selling as his lover. I don't know if Doris Day slept around a lot, and I'm not going to get into that. Probably not that much, right? She's pretty home-looking. But she's beautiful in some of her 60s films with David Niven, and that she's beautiful in all her films, and that she's gorgeously sexy in Love Me or Leave Me with James Cagney, and that it's this whole sprawling... A Star Is Born, and it's this whole sprawling, all that jazz kind of thing that breaks out in Love Me or Leave Me, and that Doris' voice is so golden. I can't diss Doris. That she dissed Rock Hudson and didn't have him on her show, probably because she thought AIDS was a punishment. But the good news is in contemporary Hollywood, we don't always take the punishment factor to light, because in certain situations, like Disney, under certain situations, used to let Christian bands into their theme park to have Christian night, and everybody loved Christian night. But then a few years later, some Christians are saying they were Christians, and nobody's really a Christian. Kierkegaard said there's no such thing, and he's probably right. And it's not just because they're immoral or whatever. I like immoral people. Christians are never immoral. They're just totally hypnotized by something. By the 3rd chapter in the Bible, which says, I hypnotize you here, you will never believe anything in this unless you believe it all. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so that religion can convince you of oppression does exist in all forms, but that somebody said that the earthquake that hit Florida was because they had gay days at Disneyland. When I was a kid and I heard that, I was immediately sensibilized to try and become gay. Dad, I only have a few gay proclivities, like with some professors I love. I love them in a gay way, but, you know, there's other... I have some gay friends I'm cool with. Gay people are cool. I'm not just saying that to be an archetype of white, saying that I'm the white savior, no. And then you're lucky to have me, no. I'm lucky to have any friends, so I'm not just going to... I'm the equalizer. I'm the critic. Everything has to be politically correct and framed well, or we'll hang you like we did D.W. Griffith, with or without Louis Armstrong's weed, bro. You got to get it down so that the critic, when he's murdering you, you're ready for him to take it right square between the eyes. All That Heaven Allows, Matt Clixton said, was the best cinematography of any movie. Now, you got Greg Toland in Stagecoach, Greg Toland in Citizen Kane. great cinematography, but some of that was trick cinematography, and he had to work with the special effects department. Same with all cinematography, really. Trick cinematography is common. It's like even at a crane shot would be trick cinematography. All That Heaven Allows, every scene looks like a Rembrandt painting, and is throwback Gone with the Wind, using such plush locales and plush narratives, but it is in contemporary times. And that her TV looks like a raging casino monster that's going to suck her in if she gets it. Totally contrasts with the director. I love the contrast with Douglas Sirk, and that's Yasujiro Ozu from Japan. Ozu in the Poetics of Cinema, that he did domestic melodramas, and one of them was an early silent film called I Was Born But, which later, of course, Ozu, following the rule of all the auteurs of the modern era, had to remake one of his own movies, which he actually remade 3 of his own movies, and they're the most unsimilar to comparison of all. But he made Floating Weeds and I Was Born But. And Floating Weeds was the sound film with color even. Ozu in color seems sacrilegious, but you still get all transcendentalized like you would if you were Paul Schrader. That Ozu places the TV in the house as this item of success. The guy's been working so hard for his boss that his boss buys him a TV, but he almost doesn't bring it in because the kids are going to monopolize it and only want to watch TV, is in Floating Weeds. But in I Was Born But, they go to the boss's house and watch a film canister, and now he's got to get a projector so the kids can watch nothing but projected movies. They're all addicted to images, like these poor kids. And the irony is we're watching this on a film, so we're like the poor kids that are just sucked into the film, and they're watching a screen and they're sucked in. That TV in a Japanese film wasn't represented in a bad light, and that the dad only used it to watch sumo game matches, and that the sumo game matches he was watching made all his stress go away in Floating Weeds. And by the footage he watched when he got his projector, the only few times he brought it out, well, he did let his kids watch, though. Was the only time he felt alive is Ozu saying, I only feel alive when my movie comes alive on screen. But the TV and All That Heaven Allows relates to American TV, and in the American TV business, there were a lot of good Playhouse 90s shows creeping up around this time. And that Playhouse 90s creeping up around this time, we're all trying to get theatrical, we're all trying to do it the way TV's doing it, and then cinema stops dead in its tracks with a movie like All That Heaven Allows, all the way up to Network, all the way up to King of Comedy, really. Maybe Strange Days, but Strange Days was more of a in-dive commentary on small microchips that make us see things that already happened in our head while something else is happening in reality. Okay, so that is a little to do with TV, but only if TV was like suddenly turning into Videodrome and eating us when we touch it.
We are encouraged to socialize with detainees and get.
But the TV and All That Heaven Allows is the first one of the first examples of how we're inveterating the TV. We're saying, well, the TV is evil, it's going to take over film. The TV is competing with our box office is losing money to TV, which isn't really true because most people that watch TV spent just as much on their TV as they did the movies, and they wouldn't have spent the extra money on the movies because they could only see so many movies anyway. But they thought there was a reason to compete. Some market went weird, market fluctuations. Maybe the studio was getting too much money, and they thinking, well, TV will make it look evil, and then we'll get even more money. So the whole thing is like cinema in a theater is supposed to be more impactful than watching a sports game on TV. And I could really argue that a sports game on TV would just be just as impactful. I could argue that. And in my TV series, I will. If we ever make it there, because we're already running 18 minutes ahead of time, and I've got to wrap up. I've got to wrap up, and I've got to show you that. Look, performance. There's Mick Jagger. And there's Mick Jagger. There's Mick Jagger. And there's Mick Jagger. We'll talk more about performance later, but that All That Heaven Allows speaks the words of Freud, quoted directly from Freud, and the word Freud is mentioned in the film, gives it an A+. That D.W. Griffith became a communist gives his whole shrouded, decadent, horrible existence peace at last in the film business, and that he was in the blacklist territory with other blacklisted directors and they didn't recognize him, but when they did, they didn't really want to be on his team, even though he was. And he showed them what beautiful Buddhist communists can be. That he was showing them that, and they realized he was Griffith. They probably looked at him like, man, you've been a relic for 10 years and you're still getting blacklisted, but then they probably thought, we don't want to be blacklisted with him. And really, that was a incident that we'd have to explain in like 4 chapters. And if you want to do something not fun, but we'll give you extra credit for this class, go to Wikipedia, type in the film Blacklist, type in Blacklist, not the show, the Blacklist. Type in the Blacklist and get to the original House on Un-American Activities in the 50s. And all the actors and actresses and directors that were put in jail for ever being communist. Not for being communist now, but forever being communist. And to me, this answers why the media is left-wing now, because the right wing had Joseph Breen condemned with censorship ruining films. The right wing had the Blacklist ruining films by taking the best writers, the best actors out of movies, because most writers and actors in Hollywood have been Democrats. It's not a conspiracy, so it's left-wing in the media because they don't want to emanate the guys from let's destroy this media, you know. They don't want to be like, we're going to put you in jail if you were ever a communist, and we're going to blacklist you for any reason we see aberrant, and we'll call it a communist, and put you in jail so you can't make any more movies. But we all know this backfired when Dalton Trumbo, resident of my Grand Junction hometown, way more powerful and big than me, even though he's dead, just for Johnny Got His Gun, which I don't have the balls to make a movie like that. Dalton Trumbo wrote about 300 scripts total, I think, maybe being the most prolific screenwriter of all time. That 50 of them got made into movies, and 20 of those got made into big Hollywood movies while he was in prison. He had a pretty cush stay where he needed to be for a while. I'm just kidding. The fact that he went to prison with Joseph Losey and all those guys pisses me off, and I would have been the Humphrey Bogart guy going both sides. Well, I hope this ends soon, and go to the other side. Well, I hope this ends soon, and go back to being my cowardice self for not admitting that I would have defended the communists. But now that the media is all left-wing, I trust the media again, because they went away from the Breen, the House on Un-American Activities, and ultimately the 1945 Paramount lawsuit, which means film studios no longer control the theaters. They had to sell off their theater chains. They kept their distribution, thank God. They kept their production, which was good, but distribution was the one they had to keep. And they totaled the theater business into this another place we have to pay that's not us. And they couldn't control the movies that went in anymore. Excuse me, they couldn't control the movies that went in anymore. They would automatically put a B movie in block booking. So if you saw one, you'd have to see the other. And that's how they made money off their B movies that wouldn't have been seen otherwise. But that some great films rose from those B movies is true. That Cassavetes, when he was, this is an important fact, when he was doing Woman Under the Influence, he was coming off of Rosemary's Baby, and everybody was thinking, that is the guy from Dirty Dozen, we're going to watch this movie. So everybody was lining up for previews of A Woman Under an Influence, which actually didn't do all that great at the box office. People were walking out of it saying, why does she keep screaming and pinching and punching her kids, and they won't take her back to the hospital right away, and they do or they don't, and she might have gotten over it at the end, but you feel so emotionally messed up that you just want to walk out on it. It's a hard movie to watch. But that Taxi Driver came out that same year, 1974, 1975, and theaters, again, with their Joseph Breen intent. This is after Joseph Breen, though, and it's still idiots that are censoring films. Like, whose job is that? I thought the censorship was the director's job. Like, if he doesn't want it in, it's by his judgment, by what he wants in, right? Because he's got a reason for it. So why take it out if you're an uneducated dude that's just saying, that offended me? Good, I'm glad it offended you. That was the point of the scene, to offend you. And really, the censorship that went down on Taxi Driver was brutal. It was worse than even when Reagan got shot at and then Jodie Foster and Scorsese were blamed. The worst thing was they weren't going to release Taxi Driver until he took out the ending where he kills everybody. But Pauline Kael, in all of her greatness, wrote the article Schopenhauer legalized Amsterdam's weed with, and that was Pauline Kael said she would quit.
She's in the film business. She'd take every film out of the theater, and she didn't even think Taxi Driver was Scorsese's best movie. She likes New York, New York, you know. The Man with a Horn remade with Kirk Douglas, and now you got De Niro and Liza Minnelli in this beautiful, lush fantasy, all that jazz scenario that doesn't go too wrong. It's like all that jazz, but they still love each other, but it still has the total love me or leave me ending, you know. So they're about to throw Taxi Driver out the window, kill the film. Scorsese's career's over. Pauline Kael's pulling everybody out. Lucas would have left. He wouldn't have made Star Wars. He was thinking about leaving when Pauline Kael even said they were blocking the movie. So Studios were like, fine, we'll release the movie, but we're going to put a red tint on the end so you can't see it as good. Scorsese was like, red tint, that's a great idea. So he mashed up this red tint that made it look straight up like a snuff film camera, and it made it way worse and way more offensive. But that's how you do a Hitchcock and take the idea they're censoring and make it bloody 10 times worse for the censors. And then they see it and they're like, well, it has the red screen, it complied with censorship standards, we're moving on. And that's why there's a lot of things today at Masterclass. I was kind of in a cheery mood, so I was kind of skipping topics. But that we covered cinema is true. That we went long is not that big a deal, because sometimes we go long. That you really only have to prove that you saw this one an hour through is true, because most lectures really only lecture for an hour. That we didn't learn everything about Cassavetes there is to know, except for this one fact. John Cassavetes made the final blow when Pauline Kael wrote her article and said, I will pull all the people that had tickets for Woman Under His Influence advanced screening. I'll pull the whole Woman Under the Influence out of theaters unless you block book it with Taxi Driver. And he didn't say block book, double feature it. So they're like, fine, take Taxi Driver, put it in. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Cassavetes saved cinema by getting Taxi Driver out of their hands, back on his double feature, and they're all riding high. It was weird when Cassavetes asked Scorsese for money, because no director asks a director for money, that I've never, even in my poor state at all, I've never asked someone that's really wealthy for their money, not because I think they're greedy for keeping it, but they got their money for a reason. They probably have $1 million they've got to spend on their payroll right now. It's like, well, I have $1 million. I can't just go to Vegas and sack it all out like I would and then get caught by Norman Bates Hotel. It's like, I got to spend this next $1 million on the next movie. So why am I going to ask him for $10 and ruin? And now he's only got $999,990 and can't afford the payroll. Someone has to get cut from the budget. You don't ask famous, but Cassavetes may have been so down on his luck he might have been going homeless. And that Scorsese just didn't have dough to help him was a weird one, because Scorsese's making films for $100 million, but that the studios again are paying him $100 million, and he's spending that all on the movie and barely recuperating it until The Wolf of Wall Street, which recuperated his $100 million scheme that had been going on 4 times, which covered about 3 of his movies. Actually, it covered pretty much the gap on what he spent out besides that and even things out. Wolf of Wall Street was such a big box office draw, and it had like real porno and real heavy stuff in it and heavy scenes and a helicopter crashing, but that it's DiCaprio at his most Hugh Hefner, and he's on Wall Street, is another movie we take seriously about how money's evil, because the money evil genre only works if it's like a Wall Street movie by Oliver Stone, the original or the remake. Boiler Room's a pretty good Money's Evil movie, but the Money Evil movie doesn't work, and Cassavetes kind of pointed that out in Rosemary's Baby, because if money is evil, then why am I spending your time, your money on me taking my class? If money's evil, nobody would do anything. It'd be like worse than communism. It'd be like, well, I have to spend money to do something, but it's evil. Or how about this? My class is going to make money, but that's evil, so don't even take my class because it's going to make money, and then we're all going to consider it evil. Well, I don't make the Money is Evil movies unless I'm trying to remake Wall Street Never Sleeps at night, because I think I've got a pretty good avant-garde Lego version of that might work, you see. The greed, the pointing out that it's greed, like Greed is the exact example of this. Greed by Erich von Stroheim, which was originally
8 hours, trimmed down to 2 by a production assistant that could only take a 2-hour movie, that Eric von Stroheim didn't know 6 hours were taken out and couldn't wait to see the 8-hour version the studio promised him. When he saw the 2 hours, he cried and cried and cried. And he said he couldn't talk for 2 weeks straight about the tragic loss of my film. Well, that's one thing. But the movie is so obligatory money is evil scheme. Although there's one part Requiem for a Dream style that they actually have a good time with their money. The rest of the time, it's greed, fighting within the family. They got riches from him being a dentist. They lose it all in Death Alley. They're both strapped to the dead horse and they're like stuck, waiting to die with nothing. And an 8-hour version of that would probably be the best movie ever made, and I'd be writing a book on the shot-by-shot still, and I'd be like, well, 3 more years I'll have this whole shot-by-shot assemblage, because this is now the movie we need to pay attention to. Yeah, Greed's still a good movie. 6 hours off of it sucks. TCM did a 4-hour version where they took the still frames of the movie, the production stills, and added them in with a little bit of camera movement. And the intertitles were also taken from the Greed intertitles, which weren't really thrown away or were recompiled in some database. And there's a 4-hour version. And for my money, that's the only version I watch, and I've seen it several times. It's actually on my phone, so I think I have it in my Google Play Store. So buy that version in your Play Store. You can just watch Greed anywhere. I'll turn on the end of Greed and freak people out with it. But these are great movies, but I personally don't like the Money is Evil movies. One of my friends, and he'll go unnamed, was going to make a Money is Evil movie, and I thought, good idea, you could do that. Being a rich person yourself, you could do that, I said. But then he said that it was based on conspiracy theories, and that, like, we all know money's evil, and that the Federal Reserve won't give us our money back, and that when they print money out of inflation and keep the stuff, and print more money for the Federal Reserve, the gold goes down. And I said, you make that movie, it'll not only be boring, but it'll run into the reason a lot of those movies don't get produced. And that is it's going to be like a couple million to produce that movie. So are you a hypocrite immediately for using $2 million not to feed a small village, but instead make a movie about the corruption of money? Well, that's all fine and good, but if you're making a conspiracy doc about the corruption of money and you're spending $2 million, aren't you corrupt too? And on top of that, why would you want to make an anti-money movie if you're trying to make money off of it, even if it is an anti-money movie? And these were the considerations of Oliver Stone when he went into Wall Street, and now we all have to burn our paper money and Orson needs Oliver Stone, so he can make one last sequel to Natural Born Killers, which is actually the original version, which was never seen because he shot 2 versions and started over a 3rd time and didn't use anything from the first 2 shots. But I heard he had a Xanadu shot in the first one that had a snow globe go crazy, and he yelled the word Rosebud, and then it was Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis shooting up people from there. So I made some jokes today. Thank you for dealing with my good humor. Thank you for this atrocity of overtime, and that we barely learned anything about these films, but what we learned is valuable. I believe that this was a valuable masterclass. We're relaxed, we're having fun. There was a couple of misnomers. Almost forgot who Sidney Poitier was, but we're there. You know, we're there to the end. That Tyler Perry is a very effective independent filmmaker, but he still cohabitates with the studio. Isn't to say he's not an indie filmmaker, but Richard Linklater's Slacker was an indie film made by an indie director, and that Richard Linklater's no longer an indie director is a little more complicated. And just because I said Richard Linklater is working for the studios, you go to your little theater room classes and replay this video and tell them, throw the tomato at the screen right when he says Richard Linklater's no longer independent. I don't like how he's saying that. And all I mean by that is because he's got logos. And I'm independent, but I've got logos, right? But still, does that make me still independent? That means people are paying for my distribution. Distribution's the biggest step in film history. That's getting the movie out there, showing the 900 versions of this masterclass at once is distribution. That costs a lot of money to show this 900 times. Thank you, YouTube Masterclass. And one day I'll teach you how to make a Masterclass video, but I'm getting there. Because I can make Masterclass videos. And we can learn from the Decalogue of the Damned, my 10 horror films that are in the Ed Wood series. We can tell that that's that Vlad the Impaler's the director of the movie, and that he's teaching directing for regular film, and that there's self-reflexivity about him having a Diary of Dracula, which was a Diary of the Damned, which was not one we made, but we made Book of the Damned, which is scarier than Diary of the Damned, because Diary of the Damned is just Dracula trying to copy the Dutch Bible word for word, and it becomes even more deranged than the Necronomicon and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And to that, we say thank you, Richard Linklater, for teaching us how to do long takes to somehow phase into another one. But I'm not as cool as Richard Linklater, and this doesn't phase into another one. But it's a lecture by me. Good night. Keep watching. Good night. We'll see you next time. Masterclass.